I thought to take advantage of being the first chairman and to thank again to the organizers that we have, I think, enough time, so we don't have time, so I think we'll jump right into the first lecture. We have 4 speakers in this first session. Our 2 first speakers are Professor YuvalSinai and Dr. Benjamin Shmueli. Professor YuvalSinai is the president of Orot College in Israel. Dr. Shmueli is a professor at Bar-Ilan University, and their project for the last years is about the theory of tort in Jewish law and modern law. And Yuval and Benjamin, please.
Okay, please share the sheets. Slide it. Okay, thank you so much for inviting us, Dov and Tzvi, and the opportunity here to have a little piece of the book we're writing, me and Professor Shmueli, about Maimonides and contemporary tort theory, law, religion, economics, and morality. It's forthcoming at Cambridge University Press, and we especially thank Professor Weinreb that comments on what we want to say about the comparison between contemporary theories of collective justice and Maimonides. Let's short introduction about the book, and then we'll speak on one issue. The book presents Maimonides' complete theory in and itself, and compared with other pre-modern tort theories, both from the Jewish world and beyond it, in Maimonides' times and prior theoretical, and especially it compared with modern Western theories. For instance, Professor Guido Calabresi is part of this project. He's writing 2 chapters in the book. The book will also seek to establish a rational, systematic, logical theory that allows for a full presentation and overview of Maimonides' comprehensive conception of tort law, its objectives and foundations. The Maimonidean theory of tort is revealed in light of all his works, halachic as well as philosophical, and the study recounts for the first time a story that was neglected by the scholars and the commentators on Maimonides, a story about the rationalization of tort laws that was told by Maimonides in the Guide of the Perplexed. So you can see a lot of the sources are from the guide you can see in your handouts. Maimonides' method, which represents more than one objective of tort law and proposes a model of differential liability, may engage in cautious dialogue with various modern tort theories. We will mention several surprising points of similarity, but we will also highlight significant differences, some of them deriving from the conceptual jurisprudential differences, some from the difference between religious law and secular liberal law, and some from the differences in historical, cultural, and social economical backgrounds. You can't miss that point as well when we're talking about a scholar that spoke about torts more than 800 years ago. A little bit about comparative aspects. Naturally, Maimonides' comprehensive approach must be examined against the background of the medieval Middle Eastern Judo-Islamic world in which he operated. In fact, some of the elements of the Maimonidean theory have parallels in Greco-Arab and Muslim Sharia philosophical and legal literature. Although I don't think I'm an expert in these fields, maybe we'll hear from others about that. And however, in addition to any similarities we can find between these theories and that of Maimonides, there are certainly differences. And for example, today we'll talk a little bit about the two forms of justice that Aristotle mentioned, the corrective and distributive, whereas Maimonides presented a broader theory of justice. Now, let's speak about three major principles that we'll deal today. The first principal aspect is that the scope of torts in Maimonides' theory is much wider than it is in common in modern world. According to Maimonides, tort law is an intermediate field between civil law and criminal law, and some types of tortious compensation have a punitive dimension. Just for illustration, if you look at Sefer Nezikin, the book of torts, in the code, it includes both criminal and what we call tort issues in the same book. It's not a coincidence from Maimonidean point of view. The second principal aspect that we will not deliberate on, a differential approach, a fundamental division into different types of tortious event in accordance with the nature and type of the damage and with the identity of the tortfeasor and the victim. There's fundamental distinctions, for example, between damage caused by person's properties, nizkei mamon, damage caused by person himself, l'chot chovel umazik, person causing physical injury, l'chot chovel, person causing damage to a property of another, l'chot mezik. These distinctions are very, very important. It has many results. For instance, the standard of care, different regimes of standard of care we find in each of these groups. The third principal aspect is maybe the most important one for today. Tort law does not have one single objective. And if we look on source number 1, Maimonides refers in various writings and principally in the guide to two main objectives to cure torts. And he's talking about the removal of wrong, hasarat avlot, a type of sort of corrective justice, looks backwards. After the damage has already been done, it seeks to correct the wrong. And miniat nezakim, the prevention of damages, something that is more similar to a consequentialist conception that is typical of economic analysis of law, looks forward to the future, and its nature is preventative. And you can see, there's no time now, in source number 1, his rationale is very, very close to, we called it the best, it's like the cheapest cost avoider, the most effective avoider. Yeah, he's talking about, if you read the Hebrew, כדי להמריץ מאוד למנוע נזקים, מחייבים אדם בכל נזק, הנגרם על ידי רכושו, שאדם יכול להקפיד, לשמור עליו, שלא יזיק, לכן חויבנו וכולי וכולי. We don't have time to elaborate on that, but please, we opened a window to a very interesting paragraph that we have here in the Guide of the Perplexed. Of course, we have not only these two meta goals, we have also other objectives less central. Examples in the guide we see in 342, you see it in the handouts as well. He emphasizes distributive justice in the description of the goals of the book of acquisition in the code. The code too adverts to religious prohibitive aspect, האיסור להזיק, and the prohibition against causing harm. And with respect to damages from wounding, theft, robbery, and murder, he presented a more criminal rationale, and that you can see in the guide as well when he talks about chapter 40, chapter 41, chapter 42, on all of these aspects. And there are two central contentions with regard to the objectives. The first, the various objectives work together and not necessarily regarded as contradictory from Maimonides' point of view. Some objectives are more dominant than others in relation to different types of tort laws, and that's very important to understand in this point. When we're talking about corrective and distributive justice, Yitzhak Engelhard recounts the history of the distinction between corrective and distributive justice, a distinction which is elaborated by Aristotle. We point out for the first time the possible existence of a real link between what Maimonides wrote in part 3 of the guide and between Aristotle's said distinction. Admittedly, Maimonides made no explicit direct use of that distinction, nor did he even mention it. However, we believe that in the guide it is possible to find expressions that are very close, although not identical. It corresponds with these two types of justice discussed by Aristotle. In our opinion, Maimonides alludes to corrective justice when he refers to removal of wrongs as one of the two meta-objectives and tort law. And the Maimonidean version of distributive justice is included in the Guide 342 when he determines that the laws of the book of acquisition in the code are based on the following rationale. The object of these prospects is obvious. They define the ways of equity in the various transactions which must take place between man and man. Both of them must mutually promote each other's interest. Neither of the parties must strive to increase only his own